Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Jeff Mazzeo, and I'm the CMO at Cytara. We want to thank all of you for joining us for this session with industry expert Pat Pijanowski. Pat and I will be talking today for about 20 minutes or so, after which we'll be answering questions from those of you in the audience. Please submit your questions through the Q&A feature within Zoom, and we'll be sure to get to as many of your questions as we can after Pat and I are done with our discussion. So first of all, Pat, I want to thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and I know the audience is as well. We've had a tremendous response to this webinar. But before we dive in, maybe you could just say a few words about your background and your career history.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jeff. I'm happy to be here and excited to be talking about one of my favorite topics, bringing digital transformation and enablement to the laboratory. I've spent nearly 40 years in and around the laboratory throughout my career. Began my career as an analytical chemist and more specifically a chromatographer by training. And you know, beyond that, have served in various roles focused on optimizing laboratory workflows and information management and digitization, automation, and that sort of thing. I've focused on a number of business transformation type of businesses, and including running two of the top tier LIMS businesses over the years, and being involved in the very early days of the research ELN sector as that was emerging in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then most recently in my career, moved into consulting for, say, the past 10 or 12 years. And then most recently was managing director of Accenture's scientific informatics services team and global practice lead there. An interesting pathway, seen a lot of change in that period of time, and really excited about where we are in the industry and the promise that digital has to change the way we do things.
Excellent, Pat. Well, thanks for that. And you know, as we found out leading up to this webinar, we're both former chromatographers, so it's good to see that you know, we can have a second career as well.
Still recovering.
Yeah. Still recovering, exactly. But obviously, you've had a tremendous career, Pat, and you're extremely well qualified to speak on the subject of lab digital transformation. So, why don't we start with a basic question, and that is, what exactly is digital lab transformation?
Sure. Well, most people think when they're responding to the term digital lab transformation, most people think in terms of technology. However, I'd say that it's best to think of it in terms of affecting business transformation within a laboratory setting, and that being enabled by technology.
Got it. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about what you mean by affecting business transformation.
You bet. Yeah. Well, efforts to affect business transformation really begin and end with a focus on business processes to be improved and the data and insights needed to support those processes. That is to say, it's a focus on improved business outcomes. Once an organization has a clear picture of that, it's then in a strong position to focus on mapping out incremental steps toward achieving those goals and the underlying technology solutions needed to enable them. Lastly, but certainly not least, the people dimension has to be attended to. From executive support to key stakeholder alignment to training and communication strategy, the people involved have to be on board and they have to be equipped to operate in the new.
Got it. And that certainly is a very, very key distinction. With that in mind, technology is important with respect to helping to bring about a digital transformation. So, you know, how should we think about technology aspects of bringing about lab digital transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. Thanks. And it's not a binary choice, right? It's not either business process or business orientation, business outcome orientation, or technology. It's both. And it's important to keep that in perspective, the balance of those two ingredients in perspective. When I think about and talk to people about um, the technology aspects, however, of bringing about digital transformation in the lab, I typically talk about 5 key technology enablers. First, get your data digital. It's still shocking to me the number of laboratories that operate in a way that at least a significant portion of data is being captured analog, shall we say, on paper, on a glove, somewhere else on a napkin, right? And then manually transcribed into a digital system. And the amount of data and metadata that is not being captured is astonishing yet to this day. We're certainly way further along as an industry than we were just 5 or 10 years ago, right? But there's still a long ways to go with this really foundational application of technology. If you want to get the full benefit of digital, you got to get your data digital, right? Secondly, capturing data digitally isn't enough. You need to have a coherent strategy for how we're going to deal with that data or make use of that data once we've got it. And so developing a comprehensive data strategy is the second key enabler that I would typically talk about, right? And capturing that data in a way and storing that data in a way that makes it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, right? We've all heard of fair data initiatives, right? They're extremely important and extremely popular these days, but it's a real foundational step. Thirdly, I talk about the taming the deluge of data that's bombarding our scientists in today's world, right? And enabling scientists to spend less time wrangling data and more time extracting actionable insights, right? In order to affect scientific progress, right? And so you can harnessing applied, artificial intelligence and/or machine learning and other applied analytics in order to get to those insights very quickly and not get bogged down in that data deluge is incredibly important. Fourthly, I talk about quick wins in the area of enhancing both collaboration and compliance via smart application of augmented and extended reality. This is really a technology field that is ripe for the picking here and can be quickly deployed for quick wins with regards to allowing colleagues to collaborate with each other around the corner and around the world in a very seamless way, right? It's also able to be extended and tailored to specific business processes to support specific business processes, both in the laboratory and cross-functionally. And so the more on that maybe a little bit later. And then last, again, not and certainly not least, maybe one of the most powerful technology enablers today is cloud and platform technologies, right? And so making sure that everything you do is cloud first, platform first approach for everything.
Excellent, Pat. Well, that's really a great summary of what you see as the key 5 key technology enablers of lab digital transformation.
Yeah, but Jeff, actually, that first one that I touched on, getting your data digital, that seems to be, what you and your colleagues at Cytera, right, are all about. Live and breathe each and every day. Maybe you should take a few minutes and talk to people about what that looks like in a technology platform like Cytera brings to bear.
Yeah, certainly, Pat, and appreciate that opportunity. So, yeah, the product that we sell is Cytera DLX. And basically what it does is digitally connect all the assets that are in a customer's laboratory. So that includes the obvious ones like instruments, everything from balances and pH meters to very complex LC-MS systems, for example. But it also includes other things like informatics systems, whether it's an ELN, maybe in an R&D environment, or a LIMS in a QC environment. It can also include data hubs or data aggregation tools like a data lake, for example, which many of our customers are now starting to put data into a data lake. And it does it with technology that's referred to as iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. That's not a new term. That term has existed for a while, primarily in the business world, for connecting different back office applications. So, for example, connecting your CRM to your e-commerce platform. That's done with an iPaaS. Cytara's DLX is an iPaaS, but it's for the laboratory environment, and there are some unique challenges to the lab environment. There are cloud-based tools like ELNs and LIMS, but the majority of the assets still exist on-prem, and so you've got to find a way to connect to them, and that's what our platform does. The key way to think about an iPaaS, and specifically Cytara DLX, is that once an asset is connected to the platform, it can automatically exchange data with anything else, that is connected to the platform. This is a very fundamental different approach to the traditional point-to-point integrations. In addition to being able to exchange data, we can automate those data flows with our platform based on whatever processes the customer has in place or whatever the business logic is that they want to apply to that movement of data. And then finally, because data integrity is so critical, one of the things that we do is we have a way of measuring all the digital transactions that are occurring, so we have that record which can be mined later on to ensure the highest level of data integrity for that data in flight. And that's something that we call the event stream. And finally, the one other thing that we always like to talk about is we like to talk about what we are, but we also like to talk about what we're not. We are not a destination application. Cytara DLX is not a destination application. It is purely an infrastructure that exists to mobilize and automate the mobilization of laboratory data.
Got it. Interesting enough, and I think this is a really exciting development, the iPaaS specific for the laboratory environment, scientifically aware, and so forth, I think is a really interesting development in the marketplace. But a lot of people I talk to really struggle getting their heads wrapped around what's the difference between creating a set of connectors for an iPaaS type of product or approach to connecting my laboratory versus building connectors for a traditional LIMS or ELN that they might already have in place. Could you explain the difference in sort of a clear and concise way?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah. And so we refer to those traditional approaches as point-to-point integration. That is, I build a connection between my ELN and maybe my CDS, right? Point-to-point between just those two assets, as opposed to, as I mentioned before, this platform approach, which is connect to our platform and you automatically can exchange data with anything else that's connected to it. But we like to talk about 6 key advantages to our approach relative to the traditional point-to-point approach. Number one, we've already kind of touched on, and that is it just gives you tremendous flexibility. So if you want to make a change, if you want to bring in a new lab asset, like a new instrument, or you want to change your workflows, very, very easy to do with an iPaaS-based approach like Cytara DLX, because you just simply plug it into the to the platform, and now it's connected to everything else in your laboratory. Whereas if you want to do that in a point-to-point world, you now have to, if you want to bring a new asset into your lab, build the required number of point-to-point connections between that new asset and whatever else it needs to exchange data with. So really, really gives you tremendous flexibility or agility in the laboratory. Second big advantage, because it's cloud-based, is that it really has infinite scalability. So as your lab grows and you want to add more assets and you want to add more work, more new workflows, very easily done because of the fact that it's cloud-based. So that scalability is essentially infinite. Whereas a point-to-point, there's oftentimes limitations on how much scalability you can achieve. Another big advantage is deployment speed. So Cytara DLX is a commercial configurable platform. It's meant to work in your laboratory with a small amount of setup for your specific instruments and workflows, so that you can, and again, because it's cloud-based, we can get it set it up right away for you. You can start connecting things to it. and be off and running. Whereas with point-to-point integrations, you've got to invest that time and effort into building them before you can start to automate the data flow. I mentioned the event stream, which monitors all the digital transactions. That really leads to an enhanced level of data integrity for the data in flight, which is something that's typically not available with point-to-point connections. Validation burden is another big advantage. It's significantly less with our approach because as a cloud-based software, obviously we do the installation qualification and the operational qualification. The only thing that needs to be done in the customer's environment is the performance qualification against their specific workflows. The customer can do that on their own, or we can do that for them through our professional services organization. And then finally, when you add all this up, the operating costs of our platform are significantly less than maintaining point-to-point integrations. Just to give you one example, so to build a connector, for example, that is something that Cytara does. So if you want to change the software version, for example, of an instrument that you're running in your laboratory, and there needs to be an update to the connector, we take care of that. That's not your problem. That's our problem. Whereas if you want to do that in a point-to-point world, then obviously you have to rebuild that point-to-point integration based on whatever the update is to the software that's involved. So, overall, those are what we see as some of the key advantages to our approach versus the traditional approach.
That's terrific. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that explanation. It's so important for people to understand and really get a full grasp of the significance of this technology shift from point to point, right, to an iPaaS type of approach that's available today, and to understand that there really are modern alternatives available to the spaghetti works of that traditional point-to-point integration that's been around for decades.
Indeed. Yeah. Spaghetti works is a term that we use a lot as well. That's why I'm laughing. Well, all this sounds great, but I imagine that, one of the questions that some of our listeners may be, feeling or have right now is that this is a big undertaking to do digital lab transformation, and they may be wondering, how do I get started? So maybe you can talk a little bit about what your guidance is with respect to how to think about getting started.
Absolutely. Look, you begin by getting your organization aligned on shared aspirational goal. And when I talk to people about this, this strikes many people as an odd place to start, right? But I think that it'll come into focus here why this is so important in just a moment. So really, as I talked about earlier, right, a focus on business outcomes needs to be at the heart of your digital transformation strategy, right? So these shared aspirational goals could be things like accelerating NDA submissions by X% via some sort of digital CMC initiative, right? Or accelerating batch release by Y% by providing your qualified personnel with fully digital review and release process, and so on and so forth, right? You sort of get the theme, right? You start with a desired business outcome, right? And set that as your shared, and make it a fairly significant business impact, right? And set that as your shared aspirational goal, right? And once you start with that shared aspirational goal in mind, it helps the organization prioritize investments from that point forward, and ensures that every subsequent project that gets funding, right, leads them incrementally toward that aspirational goal, as opposed to a scattered approach or a fragmented approach that exists in so many organizations. People are people everywhere, right? And organizations function as collections of people, right? And so to undertake something as significant as bringing about digital transformation, you really have to have the discipline to begin with and agree upon a shared aspirational approach. Lastly, next, then once you've got that shared aspirational goal, you break up the journey to get there into bite-sized incremental pieces of business transformation. And then lastly, you identify the foundational goals and activities that are prerequisites for each of those incremental business transformations, right? Now you've got a roadmap to get from point A to point B. And we all know the old saying about how the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? But an organization having the collective discipline to approach business transformation this way is absolutely invaluable.
Well, that's great advice, Pat. And setting that business transformation goal, I think I totally agree, is absolutely essential. Well, I'm sure at this point the audience is ready to start asking some of their own questions. So before we do that, I do want to point out that I believe I said at the beginning of this conversation that you and I would speak for 20 minutes, and right now we're at exactly 20 minutes. So well done, Pat, on us achieving that business goal for the day. But anyways, let's turn our attention now to some of the questions. Let's see. We've got one question that's come in already, and I would again encourage people to start submitting their questions because we've got time. We've got another 25 minutes or so. The first question actually is for me. It's related to Cytara. Once instruments I'm going to read the question out. Once instruments are connected to Cytara, you said that the data can be communicated between all systems connected to the iPass platform. Does that mean that Cytara is doing a transformation on the data? Really, really good question. So the way to think about the connectors, so fundamental to our approach is that we build connectors for all the different assets that connect it to our platform. But the way to think about them, as was described to me by one of our technical experts, is they are effectively our translators. So they take the data that's in the format of whatever the instrument or informatics system has it in, and then it converts it into an intermediate schema known as JSON, which is a universal language. Once it's in JSON, it can then be converted to whatever the format's required for the destination of that data. So again, the connector that's at the front end of that process I just mentioned is taking the native format, converting it to JSON, and then the connector for the asset that's going to receive the data takes the JSON format and converts it into the format that's needed for whatever that particular asset is. So that's what we do to the data. We are putting it into that JSON format as an intermediary before we put it into the format of wherever it needs to go, and we support whatever format is required for all the different assets in your laboratory, as well as anything else that you'd like to use, whether it's some of the emerging standards of data. So I hope that answers that question. So we now have another question in here about we utilize Kaneem workflows to manipulate data in our discovery data science organization. Will Cytara support Kaneem? What other tools can be integrated? I am not familiar with that, but I promise you that after this webinar, we will get back to you with an answer to that question. Okay, let's see what we have coming in next. Looks like we have some questions coming in maybe that are more for Pat now. So Pat, most people would agree that reducing costs and enhancing innovation are common drivers or motivations for digital transformation efforts. What is a driver for digital transformation investments that many organizations might be missing today?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I'd say without hesitation, corporate talent strategy. Surprisingly enough, one of the top motivations behind clients in recent years making digital transformation investments has been the ability for their organization to attract and retain top talent in today's workforce. So the workforce today and the workforce of the future is made up of people that have never known a world without digital enablement in their personal lives, right? The smartphone and all the apps on it and all of the capabilities that puts in the palm of our hands in our daily lives, right, is a given for those folks. And so imagine for many of these younger members of the workforce that are digital natives like this, right, coming to work and having to shed their digital persona and feel like they step back in time, right? This is a huge consideration for how people view where they want to work, which one of their job offers they might take, right? Or how long they stay somewhere, right? How easily they can be enticed to move somewhere else. right? And so it's a strategic imperative for many companies, large and small, to compete in for the top talent around the world in having a digital environment or a digital experience for their laboratory, their scientists, and their laboratory workforce that is cutting edge and attractive, right? Absolutely critical.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I would agree with you. That's often overlooked. So another question, Pat, that I think is probably more in your wheelhouse, which is, how can laboratory digital transformation support remote work and enable virtual collaboration amongst team members?
Yeah, yeah. So all of us coming off of COVID, right, and all of the remote uh, interactions and time spent away from on-premise or on-site working, this has become a front of mind kind of issue for so many organizations and the people in them, right? The good news here is this is just collaboration, right? The ability to collaborate um, amongst various sites and colleagues, like I said earlier, around the corner, around the world, is a fairly lightweight application, some pretty standard off the shelf, augmented and extended reality technology that doesn't require a sort of a boil the ocean size of effort in order to see real tangible benefits, right? You can see what I see, right? I can ask you questions, you can guide me, right? Those kinds of things. We can collaborate quite readily in working as remote teams, and doing so at scale is absolutely cool. Interestingly enough, with just a bit more investment in time and effort, right, you can actually enhance the kinds of collaboration that you might utilize AR and XR for, to support things like bringing guided method execution to life, right, and guiding scientists and analysts and technicians through complex multi-step processes in a right and enhance your right first time achievement at compliance, right? So enhancing compliance, reducing costs because of avoidance of errors and deviations and the associated investigations that go along with that, and so on and so forth, right? So I think those are two really quick wins that are available to virtually every organization without having to completely um, uh, take on a huge digital transformation effort.
Excellent. Very good. So again, I encourage the audience to submit their questions. We have a little bit of a gap now, so Pat, I'm going to throw in a question that I didn't ask you during our discussion, but I think is an important one, and that is that, when you and I have talked about digital lab transformation in the past, I've heard you say that moving at the speed of today's business requires totally new ways of thinking. What do you mean by that?
Uh, yeah, listen, for science-based businesses, changing the way science is done is absolutely critical to be competitive going forward. Right? It's become, as I said, about collaboration and innovation. Right? It's and talent. Right? It's a strategic imperative. Right? And so, accelerating innovation and differentiation, right, is critically important. Enabling global collaboration, attracting and retaining that top talent in a digital native workforce, as I mentioned earlier. These are all strategic imperatives that require organizations to break that digital adoption logjam that exists in the laboratory environment, quite frankly, these days. I think secondly, and the recognition that that's a strategic imperative, the elevation of bringing digital transformation to the lab, becoming a strategic imperative for the host organization, right? For not just in the lab, but for the business itself, right? Is absolutely critical. Secondly, then I'd say the widespread adoption of Microsoft, Amazon, Google platforms as enterprise level platforms and corporate level standardizations and investments is a critically important development, right? So cloud platforms at an enterprise level, the availability of edge computing, low code, no code business process modeling and automation tools, AR and XR technologies, right, all around us. They all represent a huge opportunity that's ripe for the taking. And these are huge strategic investments that organizations are making across the enterprise, not just in the laboratory. And so there's a huge impetus then to leverage that background infrastructure, if you will, the ecosystem that you exist in within your organization, as opposed to constantly building more and more custom tools or niche tools, right? Doing so lowers costs, makes accelerating innovation possible, right? And success. So what I'm saying here is, in summary, successful digital transformation at scale really requires a different way of thinking, and that is an ecosystem mindset.
Very good. So we've had a couple of questions that have come in the last minute or so. I'm gonna go with this one next because I think it really relates to some extent to what you were just talking about, and that is, what are your perspectives on the challenges that may potentially manifest throughout the course of implementing a digital transformation within a laboratory setting? Furthermore, what strategies and mitigation measures are available to proactively contend with these prospective issues?
Yeah. Well, this is good. I mean, we've talked about some of this already, just here in this conversation, right? But to recap and put it in perspective here, right? What's really critically important, right, is starting with a business transformation objective and getting executive level support and alignment throughout the organization that there's a transformation, a desired business outcome that's strategically important and warrants prioritization and investment, right? Doing that up front will eliminate many of the pitfalls of traditional technology-based projects, right? So first and foremost, set that shared aspirational goal, and getting the organization at the highest levels aligned around that and investing adequately in order to get there. Secondly, being prepared or undertaking this journey, right, in an incremental fashion. Don't try to boil the ocean, right? And yet don't get lost in the details or the foundational steps, right? So again, as part of that upfront planning process, map out a journey that takes your aspirational goal, breaks it down into incremental business operations steps, right? So we can get this large transformation or business outcome, and in order to do that, we need to achieve these smaller steps along the way, right? And then thirdly, right, think about each of those smaller steps in terms of the foundational capabilities and technologies that are prerequisites to achieving those small steps. So if we start with the end in mind and we work our way backwards and we get the organization aligned behind that, adequate funding, adequate resources, right? And a stepwise platform or a stepwise approach to taking that journey together makes it far more achievable and far less prone to encounter some of the classical bumps in the road, if you will, or pitfalls that we've all experienced along the way. Right. So I think those are really, it's so much of this comes down to people and human behavior, right, make up a huge portion of the success criteria for these kinds of transformation programs.
Excellent.
When you hit a bump in the road, again, it's not whether you will or you won't. You will. There will be unexpected twists and turns. Things change all the time, right? And so how you build your team and the culture that you build within that team to react to change, right? Also super important, right? You should expect that things are going to change and we're going to have to adapt and adjust, right? And accommodate that change, right? Build the mechanism, the decision-making mechanism, the communication mechanisms in order to be able to tackle those as they come along.
Very good. We're on a roll. We got questions coming in like crazy now, Pat. So next one is for you as well. Can you expand on your vision of guided method execution? Where do you see this going, and what is required to make this happen?
Yeah. So guided method execution can take various forms from very basic show that being able to pull up a document that sits on the desktop of my computer in my office and display it in a heads up display while I'm working in the laboratory, so I can follow it. I can just read and follow a procedure, right? um, that's the most basic and simplified way. It's quick, it's easy, it's almost all off the shelf technology available to make that happen, right? Um, getting access to work procedures, SOPs, and so on and so forth. That's quick and easy to do, right? And this technology is pretty robust and pretty quick to deploy. Um, Going beyond that, right, providing a more tailored environment to accommodate cross-functional uh, procedures, right? And so whether it's in a research setting or it's in a more structured quality assurance type of setting, right? Right? Being able to bring up or emulate a multi-step procedure, right, with active links to supporting documentation in a live manner is a really powerful tool to bring to life, right? And there are tools out there, many of them being used in other parts of the enterprise that you exist in, right? Low code, no code tools, for example, to emulate these cross-functional business processes and workflows, right? And then display them in a heads-up display through augmented and extended reality technologies, right? So it's a slightly more tailored approach. And then if I can jump from there to maybe the far extreme, right, is leveraging the metaverse, right? Then the metaverse continuum of options to create virtual environments in which you can do training, right, for people that need to enter hazardous environments, right? You can mock up those environments and train people without having to go into that environment, right? Or without having to consume highly valuable or scarce materials, right? Those kinds of things. And then shades of gray or everything in between are possibilities. Hopefully that answers it and gives the person who asked the question what they're looking for. If not,
Yeah,
ping us back, and I'll adjust and elaborate.
excellent. Thanks, Pat. So the next one I think maybe potentially is for both of us, and I'll read it. Maybe I'll just give a quick answer, and then I'll let you add anything else, Pat. So it says, coming from an IT background, it can sometimes be hard to convince the business of the return on investment, especially when it is only foundational work, i.e. before visible benefits. What are some recommendations you can make on convincing stakeholders to invest in, at first, abstract elements? My response to that is, I think if you go back to Pat's list of 5 that get your data digital, which is part of what we do at Cytara, doing that it is foundational work, I would agree, but it does have significant benefits right away. I mean, it sounds trivial, but as Pat said, there's still a tremendous amount of manual transcription that occurs in a laboratory setting. That adds time to a process. But more importantly, it also introduces errors, because we as humans, no matter how good we are, we're going to make errors. And now once you have an error, then you have an error investigation. So just being able to get your data digital and eliminate all those things does have visible benefits, and we can certainly help with the ROI of doing so. Pat, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's sort of 2 categories, or I'll break up the response to this in sort of 2 buckets. Maybe is a better way to say it. I think you did a nice job touching on one of the quick wins types of scenarios, right? Whether it being getting your data digital, right, and enhancing connectivity and automation, in and quantifying an ROI based upon it, reducing costs and enhancing productivity and so on and so forth, that kind of classical quick win. The AR, XR examples are examples of implementing foundational technologies in order to generate a quick win that's relatively quick and easy to quantify the ROI. Is another good example in that bucket. And so I think in that bucket, right, we can tackle things in just a discrete manner. More often, I suspect more likely what the questioner is asking about here are the more nuanced or the bigger initiatives, the foundational stuff that's a prerequisite for these larger, more complex business transformations, right? And I would say there, right, it's really difficult and probably not wise to try to justify or build an ROI business case for those foundational IT investments in the absence of a business transformation initiative, right? And so my advice would be to lock arms with your business partners and identify business transformation initiatives, right? And make sure that part of the planning process for those business bringing digital transformation to the business to drive new outcomes includes the necessary foundational technology and IT infrastructure and ecosystem investments.
Got it. Makes sense. By the way, we did get some feedback, Pat, on your response about how to deal with things that go wrong and not trying to boil the ocean. So good feedback on that answer. Another question that has come in, Pat, that's probably more for you is, as we move to digital transformation, does that mean we need to invest heavily in data protection from malware, and hence how do we prevent such?
Yeah, I think that's always a concern, and it's not just a concern for the laboratory environment. It's a concern you can rest assured for your entire organization, right? And honestly, the digital security procedures, technology, and policies that are being built and in place for virtually every enterprise, right, apply equally to the kinds of digital transformations that we would want to affect in the laboratory. And so I don't think there's, frankly, much that is unique about digital lab transformation versus bringing digital enablement and transformation to other parts of the enterprise, back office functions, sales and customer relationship management, and things like that. They're all concerned with avoiding and protecting the organization from being exposed to malware and exposing PII for both employees and clients alike and patients alike, right? That kind of thing. Right. So I would say look to your corporate, your enterprise level security strategy and mitigation techniques and technologies first and foremost. Then if there's a corner case that is specific to the laboratory, we can tackle that separately.
Got it. Very good. Well, we've only got a couple minutes left. We have answered all the questions that come in for the audience. What I wanted to let everybody know is that we will be making a recording of this available to you. We hope you do find that useful. I really want to thank you all for. Sorry, one last question came in here. I'm going to pivot quickly. On top of being an integration platform, does Cytara allow storage and data analytics? The answer is that Cytara in and of ourselves, no, we do not do that. However, what we do is we enable other vendors' solutions for data storage and data analytics. For example, we have a partnership with Snowflake, and we have a connector for Snowflake. So we can move the data, if that's what you like, into the Snowflake data lake, who obviously they offer tremendous analytics. And there's other partners as well that can do that. So I hope that answers that question. So again, as I was saying, as I was wrapping up, we will be making this recording available to you. I hope you found this useful. Pat, I want to thank you so much. I thought this was a great discussion. We got a lot of really good questions. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us and the audience.
Happy to be here, Jeff, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about, like I said, one of my favorite topics.
Very good. It's obvious with the passion with which you answered the questions. So again, thanks everybody for attending. We look forward to following up. If you have any questions, please follow up. We do owe one follow-up to the customer who asked about the question about canine, I believe is how it's pronounced. We will get back to you on that. I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks again for attending. Take care.